Welcome to Transformers, the podcast about how business people and policymakers are creating a sustainable future. I'm your host, Kai Embren. My guest today is Margot Wallström. She remains the most popular Swedish political leader for over 3 decades. She is known for her work in protecting the environment, promoting women's rights and supporting the safe passage for Syrian asylum seekers to Sweden. Margot has held ministerial posts such as Minister for Consumer Affairs, Women and Youth, Culture, Social Affairs and Minister for Nordic Cooperation and Foreign Affairs. She was also the EU's Environment Commissioner and the EU Vice President from 1999 to 2010. Along her career, Margot has always innovated and worked hard to make changes. She was the first commissioner to launch a blog in 2004 to reach out to the public, and she also succeeded to regulating use of chemical compounds and products within the EU bloc. Margot has embraced and fought for many worthy causes during her career, from the climate crisis to illegal logging in the Amazon rainforest and blood diamonds in the Republic of Congo. In June 2022, Margot was appointed as the chairwoman of the Olof Palme's International Center. The Palme Center is the Swedish labor movement's organization created to promote international development, cooperation, opinion formation, democracy, human rights and peace. Welcome, Margot.
Thank you.
You are a person with many years of experience in the political landscape in both Sweden but also globally. Today's global crisis, war in Ukraine, 1/3 of Pakistan underwater, climate refugees, health crisis, human rights crisis, the gap between the rich and the poor, and with many societies lacking values of democracy. So, how do you find the roadmap to restore our planet? How do we build resilience?
Well, I often find that we live between hope and despair in a way, and this world is now experiencing existential threats like the climate crisis, and of course also the threat from nuclear weapons, and that has been sort of become a renewed threat with not least with the war in Ukraine. And at the same time, we also have a deep crisis for democracy. More people now live in countries that go backwards from a democratic point of view than live in countries that really make progress. And of course, we are also tackling deep inequalities. And actually, I think that inequality is incompatible with democracy. Because if democracy does not deliver to people, they will start to look for other leaders and other solutions. So we are at the same time sort of hosting all of these existential threats, very serious threats. And meanwhile, we know that the world is also just such this planet is such an amazing place. And we are able of making innovations and develop all kinds of techniques and what have you. We are better informed, we are better educated, we can travel, we have so much to preserve as well, and we still enjoy nature and everything that nature can give us. But we have to make peace with nature as well.
You as a young politician find a way into politics. 25-year-old, you were elected to the Swedish parliament, but going to political party doesn't seem to be the choice for young people of today. Why? Do you see any risk in this? What needs to change? What is your advice to the Greta Thunberg generation?
Well, I think we ought to learn from Greta Thunberg instead, because she has chosen another path. She has decided that sort of politicians, political leaders everywhere have to listen to what the scientists say, and let's focus on the facts. And she is from the beginning disappointed in the lack of leadership when it comes to tackling the climate crisis. And she's right, and this is of course part of the mystery. Why is it that despite these, what is it now, 8 consecutive reports from the IPCC, that leaders have not heed the call from these scientists, why have we not been able to act? And I think that there is such a disappointment in politics and political leaders. So of course I encourage also young people to find a way into political engagement, but I also understand if they maybe want to start and practice by being a member of an NGO, an environment organization or whatever, and do something very practical, not only sort of use words, and that is understandable. But it is necessary with both a deep respect for what science tells us about the seriousness of climate change, but we also need to take political action to make the right decisions. And I think that the pressure from civil society organizations and NGOs is very, very important. So we need both. We need both civil society, NGOs, and citizens' engagement, as well as true political leadership. You know, when we ask, for example, psychologists, they say that the reason why, and behavioral scientists, they say that the reason why we have not been able to deal with climate change in the best way is because we have not been able to imagine climate change as an enemy that we are going to fight down. It has not taken shape as an enemy. We've thought of it as something that will happen further into the future, and it will affect somebody else somewhere else. And until now, that is true. It is sort of the poorest countries who have been hit the hardest. It is really not our neighbors here in Europe, for example, but now it has moved, the effects have moved also into our sphere and our daily lives, and we understand that we will also be affected. So maybe this will now sort of shift, and the understanding will be a deeper one. But
do you think
that maybe we should have called on the behavioral scientists earlier to understand what could have been done to engage everybody, and also get the leaders to act more swiftly.
Do you think the political parties need to change in the way they work?
Well, all political parties, all from left to right, and all of them need to understand that this is what will determine our lives on this planet. And also, I think the sense of urgency has to be injected into everything we do. So this is why we cannot wait longer. We have to act now. And we have to understand that it affects all different policy areas as well, from transport to energy to farming to what have you, consumption and production.
Well, there must be also a relationship to what sort of political leaders we get in the future. If we see new young people coming into politics, because we need to have politicians in position to take decisions.
Yeah.
And if
not
the young generation is not going into the political parties, then we have difficulty to find the leaders to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we have to recruit more young people also to become political leaders and help us with all of this. I'm just saying that I can totally understand that there is this sense of disappointment and resentment that is demonstrated by many of Greta Thunberg's followers, and we just have to show them that we can take important steps and that they are needed and their engagement is needed. So we have to take them seriously.
Let us.
And now we know more also about the link between climate change and the environment and security.
Let us also take another part of politics. When we talk about change and look into today's politics on structure of politics, it seems to be that parliaments and governments' offices on all levels struggle with the role of governance and implementation of policies and actions. Is it something wrong with the structure of how governments and parliaments act today? Or is it a lack of leadership or something with our democracy that needs to change?
I think it's a mix of all of those elements, because to me it's really about a matter of time perspective as well. And we know that many of the deep, very serious problems that we have to deal with, they require a long-term thinking. But our systems and structures, they are made for short-term action. And I don't know if you remember, but a number of years ago, there was a discussion about whether, the stock market, that there ought to be a little bit of a 1 second reflection time before you take big decisions that will affect the stock market. And now, of course, everything happens in a nanosecond. Big business and big affairs also on the stock market. And I think that this is very problematic, because we ought to think about generations ahead and plan in such a way that we invest in the future as well. But I don't think that our mandates or our organizations are made and the way we take decisions, it's not made to answer to that. So this is part of the problem. And I also think that the leaders have maybe put more in the hands of officials rather than sort of steering politically, legalizing everything, which I think also take away some accountability, political accountability.
You are a person that have been an activist when it comes to communication and social media. You were the first EU commissioner that started the blog, and together with Gro Harlem Brundtland and Mary Robinson was early adapter in the 2009 Road to Copenhagen and the COP meeting, creating climate justice program, and you were avatar. How do you see the media's role, and particularly the social media, to drive change?
We live in an era where social media plays an almost determining role for communication and information and communication. So I even found those blogs the other day when I went through some boxes from more than 10 years ago. And I think we have to be present. We have to use, of course, the best of information technology, but we also have to be aware that we keep sort of all the hatred and the misinformation and all of that, the sort of facts, the questioning of facts. We have to keep that also away from those platforms as much as possible. We have to be there in the debate, and we have to be active to make sure that it's not taken over by all of these haters. I worry a lot about that, because it can scare anybody away from the debate.
We have seen Elon Musk, we have seen Trump, we have seen Fox News, we have different types of leaders that are using social media. But it's also a question also maybe for schools into social media and to train them to be critical citizens, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very important as well as teaching students to read and do all of those basic things and read books and also think for themselves, think independently, reflect and find your sort of I call it your inner compass. You have to find your inner moral compass. And I spent a summer reading everything I could about role models and heroes, people that we admire a lot. And I found that this is what they all have in common. They have a very strong feeling of what is right and wrong. And it's not that they are more courageous than anybody else, that they are braver than anybody else. No, they are also feel fear, but they have a strong knowledge of what is right and wrong. And they are willing to act upon that.
Let us go into the time in the European Commission, and you struggle in the EU many years when you try to drive change and implementation of the EU chemical regulation with the proposal of REACH. What is your most important memories and learning of the work with REACH?
Well, first of all, I think my most important experience and lesson from those years was that I had established sort of an agenda, a list of priorities that I brought with me when I entered into that role. And I came very well prepared, and I can still recall exactly the points on that agenda. And they had to do, of course, with the things that we are still working on. They had to do with climate change. They had to do with the issue of water. They had to do with chemicals. And they had to do with the link between health and the environment. And this was the one point where I did not feel satisfied at all, because I think we were a bit too early to introduce that, because also we did not have sort of the competence in the European Union to do legislation and so on. But it was also, thinking back, these were years, beginning of 2000, when there was a willingness and a readiness to actually adopt environmental legislation. And if I recall correctly now, I think we presented more than 200 legislative proposals from the Commission in my field, under the environment portfolio. So that was, it was amazing. We presented so much of proper sort of Commission proposals to the Parliament and to the Council. And of course, the chemicals legislation was one of the more difficult, but we also negotiated the Kyoto Protocol, for example, in those days. So I headed the negotiation delegation on the Kyoto Protocol. But the chemicals legislation, of course, had to do with it. We had to shift the burden of proof. It should not be for sort of governments and government authorities to prove that something is dangerous. It's really for the producers to prove that it is not dangerous. Also, we had to test much more of the millions and millions of tons of chemicals that are man-made and produced also in Europe or imported. And the lobbying was absolutely brutal. I mean, I think they used me as a kind of, the voodoo doll, and to put needles in me. But they tried everything to say that it would destroy European chemicals industry, that we would lose jobs, that it would be so expensive that we could never survive and so on if it was introduced. But now it's part of trade deals. They have to fulfill, the countries that we trade with from the European Union, they have to have sort of the REACH standards when it comes to chemicals. I'm not saying that it is the perfect system at all. It has to be now renewed, and we have to set even stricter standards and continue to develop REACH. But I knew that if we got that in place, it would be impossible to do away with it. You could only strengthen it. You could only sort of, if you have a solid structure, then you can build on that and you can use it. The debate about this changed the moment that I made the blood test. I had doctors coming to me from the UK, and they said that an adult person will have hundreds of man-made chemicals in their blood. chemicals that were not in our grandparents' blood. And I was thinking, could that really be right? You know, and I knew immediately that I wanted to check my own blood for chemicals. And it took some time, but after a while, I did that. And and they found, well, you only find what you look for. You have to decide what is it that we should sort of measure. And they even found DDT in my blood, which had been banned for decades and still in my blood. So I think we found, 23 different chemicals. And from that moment, people understood that this is something that affects all of us. It's not sort of only a legal, technical sort of science thing, but it's something that affects all of us as citizens. And also, not only that, but that we transfer it, for example, through breast milk, by breastfeeding our children, we give it to them as well. So that really made a huge difference in the European debate at the time. And everybody became interested in changing and putting REACH in place.
The interest around the Amazon rainforest has also been on your agenda. About illegal logging was on your priority as a commissioner of environment. What was the biggest hurdles for you to make the changes that was necessary to succeed? And when we look at today's President Lula is back in power in Brazil after years of deforestation and destruction with President Bolsonaro. But in the time of Lula, the destruction of the rainforest was also ongoing, and the human rights for the indigenous people was also on the agenda. Do you think that President Lula will drive a necessary change for the Amazon rainforest and its indigenous people? And I know also that you were visiting the Amazon in the time and have some experience and stories from that time. Tell us more.
Well, I think we should admit, both of us, that we actually were there at the same time. Already many years ago. But I think for the new president of Brazil, it's about moving from words to deeds. Let's see what he's capable of doing. And I think whatever happens, he is probably a better candidate than Bolsonaro, because that was disastrous, of course. And we already see a lot of these things happening with a loss of biodiversity that is so crucial and that is so amazing also in Brazil and in the Amazons. So I'm hopeful, but I think we can only hope for and wish that this will be also implemented by Lula, the new president. We realized when we were there, we saw and heard of these stories with the illegal logging. As soon as darkness fell, the big trucks started to move into the rainforest. And of course, one of these huge trees can give so much money that this is profitable, and they are willing to risk a lot to do this felling of trees. And on the other hand, the loss of all the both beauty and richness of the rainforest it's not possible to describe or find words for it, because it's just so amazing. And we saw some of that as well. This is going on, and we also met with some of the oldest inhabitants in the rainforest. We met some of the tribes, or I don't know what is the right word in English, but that was also fascinating and also sad, because they are also constantly under threat, and I think feeling hunted and very much under pressure. So this is something to keep an eye on, and I hope that the rest of the world will also be able to keep expectations and pressure up on the new the new president and the political leaders of Brazil, that we don't want to see this destroyed, and it means something to the whole world.
You brought some of the thinking into the European decision making also when it comes to illegal logging. What was the decision that time?
If I remember correctly, it was very much of making sure that we have certification certificates that can ensure that we do not buy stuff produced from things taken out of the Amazons, but also to regulate the protection of biodiversity. And this is still, I mean, too little has happened here over the years, and we have such an enormous, huge loss of biodiversity. And we have to understand that this comes at a cost for all of us, and how dependent we are on making sure that we have a rich biodiversity. Everything from bees to these enormous trees in the Amazons, we are all dependent on it. So I'm hoping that's the next conference of the parties that has to do with biodiversity. And I think the Amazons is an example of exactly what we can find, the medical knowledge, the medicines that exist thanks to the rainforest. The flowers and animals and everything is just amazing. Somebody called it, we live with an ecological grief, that we must be sad over losing so much of, for example, animals, and they are extinct, and we can do a lot. We can fly to the moon, but we cannot make a rhino or one of these rare flowers. When they are gone forever.
Another part of the world that have been struggling with human rights and illegal actions we find in Africa. Issues like the blood diamonds in the Republic of Congo. And this was in the time when you were appointed as United Nations Special Representative of Sexual Violence in Conflict. Can you tell us a little bit more about this work? And how was it respond from the UN member states?
Well, this was something that I would say also changed my life and changed myself, because it left me with a heavier heart, but also maybe paradoxically with more hope for the future, because I met with so many of the survivors, and a majority of them women, who said that we are not only victims, we are people who want to be respected, to enjoy our human rights, and also we are agents of change in our villages and in our countries and in the world. And I was the first special representative, and it really had to do with making sure that we could start to end impunity for these kinds of crimes, because that is also the paradox, that it is through history, it has been the victims and survivors who have felt the burden of blame for these kind of crimes. And so that was very important, and we managed to get in place new UN Security Council resolutions that made this sort of name and shame blacklisting of actors who use sexual violence as a weapon or as a tactic in war. Also to introduce it in sanctions, and of course to make sure that we do more to prevent this from happening, and give a voice to all of those survivors and victims. So that was a part of it. And of course it took me to some of the most depressing places also around the world. And unfortunately the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is one place where we saw mass rapes, and we saw this being used on a scale that was horrendous. And money, follow the money, and you will also see who are the actors that make this possible. But we can still see it, unfortunately, even though we have both a better normative framework in place. We have, I would say, peacekeepers and other actors better trained and prepared for dealing with it. We have some of these tools and legal instruments like sanctions, etc. But this is such a historical crime that is not so easy to root out, but we have to do it. And I keep asking everywhere, where are the women? Why are they not around negotiating peace negotiation tables? Because if they're not there, this will not be identified as a war crime very often. It will not be dealt with in peace agreements and a follow-up with accountability. This is why it's important that women are around the table. To be able to prevent it and to end impunity, we have to make sure that women's voices are being heard. But I think also we can use...
It was something that I think I remember you talk about other IT tools for the women to report.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, I think, today everybody has a smartphone. Everybody has a smartphone. For example, all the refugees also from Ukraine. So we ought to be able to equip everybody with sort of both emergency numbers, with the information, what to look out for, to even trace them. As soon as you pass a border, you should have a message about, what can you expect when you pass this border, when you come into a new region or into a new country. And how can you get help, and what could you look out for, and to use it more proactively. So I think we still have some more to do with that.
My final question for you will be connected to a new position that you took on board this year, to be the president of the Olof Palme Center in Sweden. What are the focus issues, and where in the world will we see you acting and drive change?
Well, this is, of course, a true pleasure and such an honor to be able to serve as chair of the board of Olof Palme's International Center. And this is an organization that has existed for 30 years now, and works through partner organizations in so many countries around the world, and also backed up, for example, by partnering with trade unions, not least supported by big trade unions in Sweden. And we had a celebration just a few days ago. And for example, we have always been very active in South Africa. And Sweden has a particular bond and has always been helping South Africa. And they, friends from South Africa, was there to tell us exactly what it has meant, that for them to start to take over, to be in the government and build sort of a whole new society in those days after apartheid was done very much thanks to support from Olof Palme's International Center and friends in Sweden. And this is also part of what we're doing now, but we have projects, from Colombia to Africa to Asia, all around the world. So this is just a fantastic way to continue my international engagement.
Oh, great. I would like to say thank you very much, Margot, to be in the Transformers podcast with stories about your important leadership role to drive change in our global world. Thank you very much for your engagement today.
Thank you for friendship and partnership and for everything that you are doing also. Thank you.
I'm Kai Embren. Follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, where I will be announcing the future guests to this podcast, and you can expect about 2 programs a month, and each guest has a unique story of making business and society sustainable. So find out more, visit my homepage kaiembren.org. Thank you for listening.